They should therefore be infrared beacons because they are so very close. Yet no other satellite has ever seen evidence of these objects. This includes a vast array of Department of Defense satellites as far as I can learn. Because these objects are being bombarded by high energy cosmic rays, we should get a tremendous amount of heat. Dr. New suggests 300 K, which should make them infrared beacons. But NASA's infrared satellites, COBE, IRAS, and ISO, can't see these objects. Again, this tells me something. It tells me I'm looking at a very high energy quantized object that's only visible in the near and far ultraviolet light spectrum, but not visible in the lower spectrum. So I detect possibly we're looking at some sort of an extraterrestrial intelligence or possibly a UFO, but I haven't drawn that conclusion yet. In the game of process of elimination, we've eliminated space debris, we've eliminated shooting stars, and we've eliminated space junk because none of those things would be invisible in the lower spectrum of light. They would all be detectable, at least in infrared and invisible, and also in lower spectrum. But they're not. These things are only detectable in the UV spectrum. Newth continues, it simply means that we are still looking for a suitable explanation. Frank's hypothesis has not yielded any predictions that could be verified by observation that have been shown to be correct and has many observable consequences that are demonstrably false. Until he has a satisfactory answer for why we do not see what we should see in the infrared, most people will continue to believe that his interpretation of his own UV observations are flawed. They will, however, believe that he does observe some things. So again, NASA is admitting that they are actually detecting something that shouldn't be there. Other scientists deny the detection of these objects because they've never seen a high energy object before. They've never detected something that doesn't show up in infrared. And I detect the signatures written all over this that we're looking at a very high quantumized object, the very type of object that I think we should be looking for in regards to extraterrestrial intelligence. Water could essentially travel from one part of the solar system to the other and actually protect itself from the intense cosmic rays of the sun. But the only way water could do that is if these alleged water balls that are about 40 feet in diameter and 40 tons each had a phenomenal membrane or radiant barrier to protect it. Example, space shuttles the space shuttle is wrapped in an aluminum foil that actually balances out radiant rays of X-rays and gamma rays and actually protects the space shuttle from being destroyed and overly radiated by these highly charged forms of radiation. A water ball is so vulnerable out above the Earth's atmosphere that without some kind of phenomenal membrane protecting it, it couldn't survive. But the only way I suggest that it could actually arrive from one point in space to the other, assuming that Dr. Louis A. Frank is correct in his interpretation that there's actually water in these balls, is if they had this phenomenal membrane around them. As you can imagine, kind of a mirror-like or foil-like barrier. That barrier would shine and reflect off all of the very, very harmful rays and actually protect the water. But that would make it an intelligent thing. That would also make it a living thing. C. Georgi, the Nobel Prize-winning biochemist and discoverer of vitamin C, has called water the matrix of life. Without it, life cannot take hold, nor could the evolution of life begin. Basically, all living things, including humans, are made mostly of water, but we have actual barriers. In the case of humans, we have skin, and that skin has pigment in it that protects us from harmful ultraviolet rays of light that are filtered out. Plants are made mostly of water. Animals have thick skin, but they're made mostly of water. So I'm not suggesting that some naked alien entity is actually flying through space and entering our Earth's atmosphere, but I'm suggesting that if water is surviving deep transits in space in such a small quantity, that the only way it could do it is if it had some kind of phenomenal membrane to protect it. But I can't prove that in this case yet because no one has actually captured one of Lou Frank's mysterious small comets or water balls or whatever we want to call them. At this point, most scientists agree that he observed something, but we just don't know what that is yet. There was one more peculiar thing about Dr. New's last letter to me. It reads, "Yet no other satellite has ever seen evidence of these objects. This includes a vast array of Department of Defense satellites as well and as far as I can learn. If the Department of Defense was looking for these objects, we must assume that they were also mystified, that someone at NASA was mystified about these objects. Because if they were water balls, why would the Department of Defense go looking for them? And if, as some scientists hypothesize, that there was nothing there, and that Lou Frank made an incorrect interpretation of a signal, then why, again, would the Department of Defense use a vast array of satellites to look for these objects? We must assume that someone up at NASA, very, very high up, ordered the search and the effort to actually try to detect these objects on a vast array of more sophisticated satellites. And that would mean that they don't really believe that these things are just some sort of passing and unimportant phenomena.
Continuamos en la siguiente parte. Hola amigos de Factor Maya, aquí con la continuación de Evidencia, el caso de la NASA de los OVNIs.
Other environmentally interesting targets of opportunity during the day passes. Typically when the orbiter is on the dark side of the Earth, as it is now, at least for the next 5 to 6 minutes, the low light level black and white cameras are much better at observing the Earth's surface and the star clusters as the orbiter passes high overhead. When the orbiter moves within a daylight pass, the color cameras in the payload bay are used to get more interesting sights on the day side of the Earth.
The first object that we're looking at on this videotape, we have one of 3 incredible phenomena happening at the same time, so we're going to kind of break it down and start with each phenomena and kind of go into them a little bit. So the first thing we see is a bright fireball leaving the zero plane of Earth. Earth is over here, at about 35 degrees away from the zero plane and going straight up out into space, up here. The object is moving across the screen. And we have to assume, what is this object? For one, we're looking at the space shuttle's black and white low-level cameras that can see into the near ultraviolet spectrum, so we may be seeing a quantumized object. But also, it's leaving Earth's gravity, and that's something that is impossible unless the object has internal energy in it, energy that's powerful enough for the object to actually escape gravity. So this object is definitely escaping the Earth's gravity, and that is simply cannot be a natural object. Any meteor, shooting star, or piece of space dust is going to get pulled into the powerful gravity of the Earth and burn up as it hits the Earth's atmosphere and disappear in a matter of a few kilometers, assuming it's a very small object. This object doesn't do that. It escapes Earth's gravity, so we have to assume that it has internal energy in it, and that leads us to the possibility that we're looking at a UFO. The second object we're looking at in this scene is called the high-speed turn. If you look up in this portion of the video monitor, you're going to see an object come in, make a high-speed turn, heading out into space, not quite a 90-degree turn, and then it will be followed and pursued by another actual object going this way. So again, when we consider the physics of a solid object traveling at least a couple of thousand miles an hour, making a high-speed turn, and probably in the neighborhood of 20 to 30,000 miles an hour, the physics of a turn like that is actually impossible. For any physical object going that speed to make a sudden turn, the G-forces on the turn alone would destroy physically, actually, your entire physical body if you were inside of a spacecraft as we know it, would just smash like a pancake. You'd be spam in a can. You'd be dead. In fact, even a meteorite, a solid object making a turn like that, the explosion on the turn, the G-forces and the collapsing of matter would cause a nuclear fusion explosion. It would cause a massive explosion. And if this high-speed turn was caused by an impact, a collision with another object, and then deflected off of the object and made a turn, you should see a massive explosion at the point of the turn, and we don't actually see that. The only way that I hypothesize that any object could make a high-speed turn like this is if the object was a highly quantized energy phenomena, that if matter, mass, was actually transformed into high-frequency waveform energy and had no actual weight to it. In fact, it became lighter than the lightest elements we know on the Earth. Only then could an object make a turn like that and survive, and physically and structurally survive. And again, the very fact that this can do this suggests to me the kind of physics that these craft are using. They have taken raw, solid mass, a solid spacecraft or solid material, changed the frequency into a high-energy waveform, and in that waveform, they're able to not only conquer light speed and possibly do light speed and conquer light speed, but they're able to make turns like this and maneuver in ways that are just impossible, that would cause a nervous breakdown to any modern physicist. No physicist can look at this object and admit that we're looking at anything other than possibly dust in front of the camera lens or some sort of debris, because they know that for any massive object to be doing velocities greater than even at 100 miles an hour, which this object is obviously going much faster than. Imagine going 100 miles an hour on a freeway and all of a sudden you just turn on a dime and go in a different direction. What would happen to your body inside of the automobile? You would go flying through the windshield at 100 miles an hour and you'd be dead. So what kind of physics are these craft using? What are we actually seeing here? Is this space dust? Is this debris? Is this a shooting star? Is this a meteorite? The answer is no, because we know that no physical object could structurally survive a turn like that. What you're about to see is the hypervelocity object sequence. It's actually one of my favorites in the investigation because it has some very powerful conclusions. So if you look in your video monitor, over here to the lower right, you're going to look for a little fuzzy object. It's very fuzzy. There's a lot of static on the screen. And you're going to see it moving at incredible speeds in a very curved fashion, going into the atmosphere and disappearing at the point of the horizon, right here. It's absolutely conclusive. If this object disappears on the horizon, that this is not a piece of dust in the near fields of the camera lens, 20 or 30 miles away or even 10 feet away. The object moves in a very curved fashion, suggesting it's moving over the curvature of the Earth, and very curved and disappearing on the horizon and probably going around to the other side of the planet. The fact that it's going around the planet and disappearing on the horizon is absolutely conclusive. And this is a very important piece of footage because nowhere else do we have a scene where we have such powerful relativity. Because we know the object is going from here to here, if we could assume the distance, if we could actually find the distance that the object moved, we could calculate its speed. Assuming the Earth is approximately 25,000 miles in circumference, and that using some modest calculations as to the curvature of the Earth here, I estimate that the distance between here...
Continuamos en la siguiente parte. Hola amigos de Factor Maya, aquí con la continuación de Evidencia, el caso de la NASA de los OVNIS.
What you're about to see is a hypervelocity object sequence. It's actually one of my favorites in the investigation because it has some very powerful conclusions. So if you look in your video monitor, over here to the lower right, you're going to look for a little fuzzy object. It's very fuzzy. There's a lot of static on the screen. And you're going to see it moving at incredible speeds in a very curved fashion, going into the atmosphere and disappearing at the point of the horizon, right here. It's absolutely conclusive. If this object disappears on the horizon, that this is not a piece of dust in the near fields of the camera lens, 20 or 30 miles away or even 10 feet away. The object moves in a very curved fashion, suggesting it's moving over the curvature of the Earth, and very curved and disappearing on the horizon, and probably going around to the other side of the planet. The fact that it's going around the planet and disappearing on the horizon is absolutely conclusive. And this is a very important piece of footage because nowhere else do we have a scene where we have such powerful relativity. Because we know the object is going from here to here, if we could assume the distance, if we could actually find the distance that the object moved, we could calculate its speed. Assuming the Earth is approximately 25,000 miles in circumference, and that using some modest calculations as to the curvature of the Earth here, I estimate that the distance between here to here is roughly 1/24th, 1/25th of the Earth's circumference. So that would make the distance between here and here roughly 1,000 miles. If the object traveled between here and here, I counted in approximately 4 seconds, we can assume that the object is going approximately 250 miles per second. That is an incredible speed. It actually comes to 900,000 miles per hour. 900,000 miles per hour is faster than any known object to man and to spaceflight. Assuming the space shuttle is traveling at approximately 18,000 miles in the opposite direction, 18,000 miles an hour, I would have to subtract that speed, and we would come to 882,000 miles per hour for the object. So it's roughly going between 900,000 and 882,000 miles per hour. Incredible speed. We've never seen anything going this fast. Remember, the Apollo missions to the moon averaged 3,300 miles per hour. The space shuttle is going at 18,000 miles per hour. And meteorites and shooting stars top at around 45,000 miles an hour. So we know from the object speed that we're looking at, there's no way this is a shooting star or a meteorite. It's far too fast to be an object like that. And also, our fastest satellites using ion propulsion drive systems are going roughly tops at maybe 35,000 miles an hour. So comparatively, if all of this is correct, and the object is actually traveling at 900,000 miles an hour, we're looking at speeds that are beyond anything known to science at this point in time. So before we actually decide if this is actually a UFO, we will have to do some estimates and some studies into advanced propulsion systems being conducted at some of our universities and some of our space labs to see if anyone could come up with speeds anywhere near this. We know that current technology, again, NASA today is actually using thruster engines in the space shuttle, and the Apollo missions to the moon are also using thruster engines that fire out tremendous amounts of hydrogen and other gases at tremendous speeds. And with all that thrust capacity, we're getting speeds between, maybe topping at around 20,000 miles an hour. But actually, we're getting beyond that now. We're starting to go into what are called ion propulsion systems. Remember in 1989, after I had a long conversation with Dr. Earl Van Lanningham, then head of Propulsion Power and Energy Division at NASA, we were talking about nuclear fusion, a particular type of nuclear fusion called deuterium-helium-3 fusion. Deuterium-helium-3 fusion was being developed by a scientist named Dr. Bogdan Kastelmaglich, an MIT PhD, who had spent about $27 million in research onto a new type of non-radioactive fusion. NASA at the time was very interested in this, Dr. Van Lang told me, because NASA was looking for a space power source. They needed a type of energy to drive its future ion propulsion systems. At the present day, the best power sources they could get were around only 100 kilowatts, 100,000 watts. So looking at deuterium-helium-3 fusion, Dr. Van Lanningham told me, produces an energy of 18 million electron volts per fusion, an energy level that is far beyond any of our current space power sources. He also said that he was very interested in this particular type of fusion because he realized that 18 MeV protons, 18 MeV energies applied to protons could power spacecraft at velocities beyond our current imaginations. He said at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, they were doing studies into what are called anti-proton propulsion systems. He said that 18 MeV protons could send spacecraft up to 1/10 the speed of light. 1/10 the speed of light comes to 67 million miles per hour. 67 million miles per hour. So if we could imagine that somebody has actually developed a technology that powerful, we can see when we do a comparative analysis that our object that is moving between 900,000 and 882,000 miles per hour fits well within the constraints of a nuclear propulsion system. But we know for certain that Dr. Bogdan Castle-Maglish's helium-3 fusion did not get proper funding. The project didn't get completed. At the time, James Fletcher, who was then the chief administrator of NASA, went to the United States Congress and asked for funding to complete this fusion because, again, it would be the most powerful form of energy for space stations and for space propulsion systems that NASA had ever developed. He was turned down. The project didn't get completion funding, and to this day remains, in a scientist's mind, it hasn't gone any further than that. So where else on the Earth could we find evidence of nuclear propulsion systems being developed? We've all heard of the Area 51, the mysterious base in Nevada where people see phenomenal black ops and secret projects and objects that may be UFOs flying in the skies being test flown by secret Air Force Base scientists. Well, I did some research into the top 4 defense contractors in the United States. You have Boeing, you have SAIC, you have Lockheed Martin, and you have EG&G. EG&G boasts that in 1968, at the NTS rocket station in Nevada, that's the Nuclear Test Site rocket station in Nevada, Phobos 2A, the most powerful nuclear reactor and nuclear propulsion system, is successfully tested. The most powerful nuclear propulsion system ever tested, successful in 1968. So if that was successful in 1968, we can only imagine where that research is today. But NASA doesn't use nuclear propulsion systems, so who was using these technologies and where? So it could be possible that there is a secret alternative space program utilizing these technologies, and that the object we just saw is actually a test flight that the space shuttle crew knew was going on and actually videotaped it as a test to see the capabilities of this craft. That's a possibility, but we can't actually arrive there yet because we have one more problem. I'll demonstrate what that is. The space shuttle flies at an altitude of about 300 miles above the Earth. This is the space shuttle here, and this is the top of the atmosphere here.
Continuamos en la siguiente parte. Hola amigos de Factor Maya, aquí con la continuación de Evidencia, el caso de NASA de los OVNIS.
The top of the atmosphere is at about 100 miles, according to Dr. Newth at NASA. So we can assume there's a distance between the top of the Earth's atmosphere and the space shuttle of 200 miles. Okay, so that means if the object, as we have concluded, was moving over the curvature of the Earth and disappeared in the atmosphere and went around the other side, and we didn't see the object go way up here and loop out and go around the other side. That would mean it went above the top of the atmosphere. It disappeared right in here, which means it must have went around the other side of the Earth. So we know the object is down in the 100-mile range. If the object is down in the 100-mile range, and the space shuttle is at 300 miles above it, then the distance between the object and the space shuttle must be at least 200 miles. The very fact that you can even see an object from 200 miles is incredible. Have you ever looked up at a 747 flying in the sky above you at 35,000 feet? You can see the vapor trail very clearly, but the 747 is just a tiny dot in the sky. 35,000 feet is roughly between 6 and 7 miles away. In this case, we're looking at an object 200 miles away. Again, I say it's amazing that you can even see an object that far away. So if we're looking at an object 200 away and it's even visible from 200 miles away. My estimates suggest that the object must be massive in size, far bigger than a 747. I guess approximately around a half a kilometer to a half a mile wide. If the object is a half a kilometer to a half a mile wide, it must be something beyond anything we're developing here on the Earth, because there's no way we can imagine that our space programs are developing spaceships that large, that are capable of going 900,000, 800,000 miles. And another problem exists in this, the idea that this may be a human-made or a man-made spacecraft. If the object is going at nearly 1 million miles an hour and moving in this curved fashion over the Earth, as soon as you start accelerating a spacecraft or an aircraft, and it starts making turns, you get G-forces. At these speeds, I don't believe any pilot could possibly survive the turns and the G-forces at 900,000 miles an hour. I think it would be impossible on the human body. Again, suggesting that this is a highly energized quantum object that's vibrating at a very high frequency, which means its mass has been converted into a very high frequency wave state, which can allow it to make these incredibly high speed turns and even radical turns like the object we saw earlier, and basically implicating the possibility of what we're looking at is actually a UFO. The next thing you're about to look at is called the Hubble Repair Mission Sequence. It shows two astronauts repairing the Space Hubble telescope. What's peculiar about it is there's an object going behind them. It has kind of a light flashing to it. And it goes behind the astronauts, and we actually hear them talking about it. So listen closely to what they actually say.
Looks like you got an object right in front of you, Mark, when you're looking out there. I don't know what you're talking about. Never mind. Are we missing something? I don't see anything. Yeah, we think the camera filter came off the mark. It's about your 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock going away. Don't worry about it.
So what were the astronauts actually saying? We heard, it looks like you got an object right out there in front of you, Mark. Are you looking out there? It's about your 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock going away. Don't worry about it. We know the astronaut on the left is probably the one we're talking about. That's probably Mark, because at his 11 o'clock position is where we actually see the UFO, or we see the unidentified object. It has a light flashing to it. It's definitely going behind them. So we can assume immediately that obviously these astronauts are not talking about space debris or space junk going by, because it's obviously something of significance. It captures their attention for a moment, and they're told to ignore it and to focus on the repair of the mission. So we could assume maybe they've been seeing these things frequently out there. Maybe this is an ordinary occurrence, and it's not something they should become so alarmed about. Later we hear, we think the camera filter came off, Mark. We know camera filters are screwed tightly onto cameras. There's no way they would unscrew in space and go floating out there. So obviously, again, this is one of NASA's blatant lies, trying to tell the public during a live broadcast that what we're seeing is something that they can explain. The next scene you're about to see is called the Russian Space Station Mirror Sequence. The first part of this scene actually just shows two little, what appear to be shooting stars, and what we're told are shooting stars, streaking through the hue of the Earth's atmosphere. The problem is they just keep going, and they keep going, and they keep going. They never burn up. So what's wrong with this scene? They appear to be just meteors, and I shouldn't really even be arguing the point, but I am, for one very specific reason. Meteorites, when they strike the Earth's atmosphere, they're usually very small pieces of rock, maybe this big around, some this big around, and some larger ones. But most meteorites are small enough that they burn up within a few kilometers. After they come into the Earth's atmosphere, they start to flare and burn up. And the resistance on the Earth's atmosphere, their velocity, produces so much heat that they're basically gone in a matter of a split second. If you've ever seen a shooting star streaking across the sky, it literally just streaks, you see it, and then it's gone. That's because it burnt up and it's finished. So the only way a meteorite could go for the large distances that these objects go through and continue to streak on would be as if they were massive in size. In 1908 in Siberia, an event called the Tunguska event, a massive 70-meter wide meteorite, only 70 meters wide, struck the means that we are still looking for a suitable explanation. Frank's hypothesis has not yielded any predictions that could be verified by observation that have been shown to be correct and has many observable consequences that are demonstrably false. Until he has a satisfactory answer for why we do not see what we should see in the infrared, most people will continue to believe that his interpretation of his own UV observations are flawed. They will, however, believe that he does observe some things. So again, NASA is admitting that they are actually detecting something that shouldn't be there. Other scientists deny the detection of these objects because they've never seen a high-energy object before. They've never detected something that doesn't show up in infrared. And I detect the signatures written all over this that we're looking at a very high quantumized object, the very type of object that I think we should be looking for in regards to extraterrestrial intelligence. Water could essentially travel from one part of the solar system to the other and actually protect itself from the intense cosmic rays of the sun. But the only way water could do that is if these alleged water balls that are about 40 feet in diameter and 40 tons each had a phenomenal membrane or They should therefore be infrared beacons because they are so very close. Yet no other satellite has ever seen evidence of these objects. This includes a vast array of Department of Defense satellites as far as I can order. Because these objects are being bombarded by high-energy cosmic rays, we should get a tremendous amount of heat. Dr. New suggests 300 K, which should make them infrared beacons. But NASA's infrared satellites, COBE, IRAS, and ISO, can't see these objects. Again, this tells me something. It tells me I'm looking at a very high-energy quantized object that's only a radiant barrier to protect it. Example, the space shuttle is wrapped in an aluminum foil that actually balances out radiant rays of X-rays and gamma rays and actually protects the space shuttle from being destroyed and overly radiated by these highly charged forms of radiation. A water ball is so vulnerable out above the Earth's atmosphere that without some kind of phenomenal membrane protecting it, it couldn't survive. But the only way I suggest that it could actually arrive from one point in space to the other, assuming that Dr. Louis A. Frank is visible in the near and far ultraviolet light spectrum, but not visible in the lower spectrum. So I detect possibly we're looking at some sort of an extraterrestrial intelligence or possibly a UFO, but I haven't drawn that conclusion yet. In the game of process of elimination, we've eliminated space debris, we've eliminated shooting stars, and we've eliminated space junk because none of those things would be invisible in the lower spectrum of light. They would all be detectable, at least in infrared and invisible, and also in lower spectrum. But they're not. These things are only detectable in the UV spectrum. Newt continues, it simply